The snow fell thick and heavy over Boston that February night, turning the city into something that looked peaceful from a distance but felt brutal up close. Natalie Brooks sprinted through the hospital parking lot, her thin jacket doing nothing against the wind that cut through her like knives. Her phone had fallen twice already, screen cracked, but she kept running. Her mother's heart had stopped. Those were the only words that mattered now. Everything else, the unpaid rent, the student loans, the 3 jobs she juggled just to keep them both afloat, all of it disappeared behind that single terrifying truth. Boston Memorial Hospital rose before her like a fortress of glass and steel. Natalie burst through the emergency entrance, gasping for breath, her dark curls plastered to her face with melted snow. The fluorescent lights hurt her eyes after the darkness outside. "Catherine Brooks," she managed to tell the nurse at the desk. "I'm her daughter. They called me about cardiac arrest." The nurse's expression softened with practiced sympathy. "4th floor, cardiac ICU. Dr. Ashford is with her now." Natalie didn't wait to hear more. She ran for the elevators, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Each second felt like an eternity. When the elevator doors finally opened on the 4th floor, she nearly collided with a nurse carrying a tray of medical instruments. Through the observation window, she saw her mother. Catherine Brooks, who had raised Natalie alone after her father died, who worked as a seamstress until her fingers ached, who never complained even when things got impossibly hard. Now she lay motionless, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed, keeping her alive. Several doctors moved around the bed with urgent precision, but one stood out. Tall and commanding, he studied the monitors with intense focus, his dark hair falling slightly across his forehead as he leaned closer to check something. His hands moved with absolute certainty as he adjusted equipment and gave quiet orders to his team. Dr. Julian Ashford. Even through her panic, Natalie recognized him. Everyone in Boston knew his name. The brilliant young surgeon who had revolutionized cardiac procedures, heir to the legendary Ashford Medical Foundation. He looked exactly like his pictures in the medical journals, sharp features, strong jawline, eyes that seemed to see straight through to the truth of things. He glanced up suddenly, and their eyes met through the glass. For just a moment, time seemed to suspend itself. His gaze held intelligence and something else, a depth of experience that came from standing at the border between life and death more times than most people could imagine. Then he looked away, refocusing on his patient, and Natalie felt herself start breathing again without realizing she had stopped. The impossible offer. 20 minutes passed like 20 years. Then the ICU doors opened and a nurse approached with a gentle smile. "Your mother is stable now." Dr. Ashford managed to restore her heart rhythm. "She's not out of danger yet, but she's fighting." Natalie collapsed against the wall, tears streaming down her face. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that her legs nearly gave out. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." The nurse handed her a clipboard. "You'll need to review the treatment plan and the estimated costs for the next phase of care." Natalie looked down at the papers. Her vision blurred as she tried to make sense of the numbers. Emergency surgery. ICU monitoring. Medications. Follow-up procedures. The total at the bottom made her stomach drop. $78,000. She checked her phone's banking app with shaking hands. Account balance, $412. The world tilted sideways. Natalie slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold linoleum floor, her head in her hands. She had been holding everything together for so long, working as a graphic designer during the day, waitressing at night, doing freelance projects on weekends. But this was beyond anything she could manage. This was impossible. A pair of expensive leather shoes appeared in her line of vision. Black, perfectly polished, the kind that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Miss Brooks." The voice was deep and steady, cutting through her despair like a lifeline thrown into dark water. Natalie looked up to find Dr. Julian Ashford standing before her. Up close, he was even more striking than through the observation glass. Over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, with gray-blue eyes that seemed to calculate everything they saw. "Your mother is going to need surgery within the week," he said. "A valve replacement. It's a complex procedure, but I've performed it successfully many times." Natalie wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. "I know. I saw the estimate. I just don't know how I'm going to pay for it." Julian studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Come with me, please. There's something we need to discuss in private." Confused and exhausted, Natalie followed him down the hallway to a small consultation room. The space felt warmer than the harsh corridor, with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. Julian closed the door and turned to face her. "I'm going to be direct, Miss Brooks," he said, his hands clasped behind his back. "I find it more efficient than dancing around difficult subjects." "Okay," Natalie managed, though her heart was starting to race for entirely different reasons now. "I need a wife." The words landed in the quiet room like stones dropping into still water. Natalie blinked, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "I need to be married within 3 weeks," Julian continued, his tone as clinical as if he were describing a medical procedure. "I have a proposal for you. A business arrangement that would benefit us both considerably. The contract of hearts." Natalie opened her mouth, then closed it again. Nothing in her 28 years of life had prepared her for this moment. She had imagined many scenarios for how this night might end, but this was not among them. Julian pulled out a chair and gestured for her to sit. When she did, he remained standing, clearly more comfortable in a position of authority. "Let me explain the situation. In 3 weeks, I turn 35. According to the terms of my grandfather's will, control of the Ashford Medical Foundation passes to me on my 35th birthday, but only if I'm married." "That's absurd," Natalie said before she could stop herself. "I agree completely," Julian replied without hesitation. "My grandfather believed that marriage demonstrated stability and commitment. He thought someone running a multi-million-dollar medical foundation should have a family to ground them. But you don't." "I don't." His jaw tightened slightly. "My work is my priority. I don't have time for romance or the complications that come with it. But I also can't allow the foundation to fall into my cousin Victor's hands." The way he said Victor's name carried unmistakable distaste. Natalie found herself leaning forward despite her confusion. What would happen if he took over? Julian's eyes darkened. "Victor sees the foundation as a business opportunity, nothing more. The research programs I've built, the medical scholarships, the free clinics we operate in underserved neighborhoods, all of it would be liquidated for profit within a year. 15 years of work, destroyed." For the first time since entering this strange room, Natalie saw past the cool professional exterior. This mattered to him deeply. She could hear it in the slight edge that entered his voice, see it in the way his hands had formed into loose fists at his sides. "I still don't understand what this has to do with me," she said quietly. Julian moved to the desk and pulled out a folder. "I'm proposing a contract marriage. 1 year. You would live with me, appear with me at foundation events, maintain the appearance of a normal married couple. After 1 year, once my position is secured, we divorce quietly. The foundation remains intact, and you walk away with enough money to start a new life." Natalie's head was spinning. "You want me to pretend to be your wife for a year?" "Yes." "Why me?" "You could choose anyone. Someone from your world, someone who actually knows how to act like they belong in high society." Julian sat down across from her, and for the first time, something like vulnerability crossed his features. "Because you're real, Miss Brooks. I watched you through that observation window. Your fear for your mother was genuine. You weren't performing for anyone. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You just loved her and wanted her to live. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Everyone in my world performs constantly. They want something from me, my name, my money, my connections. But you? You didn't even know who I was. You just wanted your mother saved. That authenticity is exactly what I need to make this believable. And what do I get? Natalie asked, though she already knew the answer. I'll cover all of your mother's medical expenses. Everything. The surgery, the recovery, all medications and follow-up care. I'll perform the surgery myself, which means she'll have the best possible chance. He slid a paper across the desk. And when our year is complete, I'll pay you $200,000. The number hit Natalie like a physical blow. $200,000. Enough to pay off her student loans. Enough to finally pursue her design career properly instead of working 3 jobs just to survive. Enough to give her mother the comfortable retirement she deserved. Enough to change everything. There's one condition, Julian added, his voice dropping lower. The most important one. Natalie looked up from the paper to meet his eyes. You cannot fall in love with me. The room fell silent except for the distant beeping of hospital monitors and the soft hum of the heating system. Natalie felt as if she had stepped out of reality and into some strange dream where nothing made sense anymore. I need someone who can maintain professional distance, Julian explained. Someone who understands this is purely a business arrangement. Romance would complicate everything and potentially jeopardize the entire agreement. So that's the rule. No falling in love. Natalie should have laughed. The whole situation was ridiculous, like something out of a movie. But she couldn't laugh because her mother was lying in a hospital bed 3 floors above them, fighting for her life. Because she had $400 to her name and bills she couldn't pay. Because sometimes life left you with choices that weren't really choices at all. She thought about her mother's face, pale against the hospital pillow. She thought about all the sacrifices Catherine had made, working until her hands bled to keep them fed and housed. She thought about the words her mother always said when things got hard, "We're survivors, Natalie. We do what we have to do." Can I see the contract? Natalie asked. Julian pulled out several pages of legal documents. Natalie read through them carefully, her graphic designer's eye-catching details others might miss. Everything was there in black and white. 1 year of marriage. Public appearances as required. Separate bedrooms. Complete medical coverage for her mother. The final payment upon successful completion of the agreement. And in bold letters at the bottom, both parties agree to maintain emotional distance and refrain from romantic involvement. If I agree to this, Natalie said slowly, when would we start? The wedding would be in 2 weeks. Small, private, but legal. Your mother's surgery would happen the day after tomorrow. I've already cleared my schedule. Natalie looked at the papers again. At the number that could save her mother's life. At the stranger sitting across from her who somehow held all the power in this moment. She thought about love and rules and the strange ways life pushed people together. She thought about her mother's laugh and her own abandoned dreams and the weight of years spent just trying to survive. I have one question, she said finally. Julian waited. What happens if I do fall in love with you? For the first time, something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth, though it didn't reach his eyes. That won't happen, Miss Brooks. I can promise you that. I'm not someone people fall in love with. There was something sad in the way he said it, as if he had long ago accepted a truth about himself that others found difficult. Natalie saw then that Julian Ashford, for all his money and success and brilliance, was just as lonely as she was. Just as trapped by circumstances he couldn't control. Maybe that's why she did it. Maybe that's why she picked up the pen he offered and signed her name at the bottom of the contract. Natalie Marie Brooks, in her careful designer's handwriting. Okay, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I agree. Julian didn't smile or celebrate. He simply nodded once, stood up, and extended his hand for a formal handshake. When their hands touched, Natalie felt a small electric shock, probably just static from the hospital's dry air. Your mother's surgery is scheduled for Wednesday morning at 7, he said. I'll be performing it personally. As for us, we have 2 weeks to prepare. My assistant will contact you tomorrow with the details. He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. Without turning around, he added one final thought, his voice so quiet she almost missed it. Thank you, Miss Brooks. You're saving something that matters more to me than I know how to express. Then he was gone, leaving Natalie alone in the consultation room with a signed contract and a future that had just turned into something completely unrecognizable. She looked down at her hands, still shaking slightly. In the span of one impossible night, she had lost everything and gained everything. Her mother would live. Her debts would disappear. And all she had to do was spend 1 year pretending to love a man who had made it perfectly clear that love was the one thing he would never want from her. How hard could that be? 5 days after signing the contract, Natalie stood in the lobby of Harbor Heights, the most exclusive residential tower in Boston. Her entire life fit into 2 suitcases and a backpack. Everything she owned could be carried in one trip from the taxi to the elevator. The thought made her feel small and unmoored, like a paper boat set adrift on an ocean too vast to comprehend. The lobby gleamed with marble and gold accents. A massive chandelier hung from the ceiling, catching the afternoon light and scattering it into 1,000 dancing fragments. The security guard, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, smiled at her approach. Miss Brooks? Dr. Ashford is expecting you. Top floor, the penthouse. I'll take you up personally. Natalie followed him to a private elevator, one that required a special key to operate. The doors were brushed bronze, polished to a mirror shine. As they ascended, she watched the numbers climb higher and higher. 20 floors. 30. 40. The city spread out below them through the glass walls of the elevator shaft, Boston transforming into a miniature version of itself. Her mother's surgery had gone perfectly. Julian had worked for 7 hours straight, replacing the damaged valve with steady hands and unwavering focus. Catherine was recovering in a private room that overlooked the harbor, surrounded by flowers that Julian had arranged to be delivered. When Natalie had tried to thank him, he had simply nodded and said it was part of their agreement. Everything was part of the agreement. That was the phrase that kept echoing in her mind. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the 42nd floor. The doors opened directly into the penthouse, and Natalie stepped into a space that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around 3 sides of the apartment, offering panoramic views of Boston Harbor. The water stretched out to the horizon, dotted with sailboats that looked like white wings against the blue. The interior was decorated in shades of gray and cream, modern but warm, with carefully chosen art pieces on the walls and sleek furniture that probably cost more than her college education. Julian emerged from what appeared to be a home office, dressed casually in dark jeans and a gray sweater. It was the first time Natalie had seen him in anything other than his doctor's coat and surgical scrubs. He looked different this way, younger, almost approachable. "Welcome," he said simply. "Let me show you around." He gave her a tour with the same clinical efficiency he probably used when explaining procedures to medical students. Kitchen with restaurant-grade appliances. Living room with a sound system built into the walls. A library filled with medical journals and leather-bound books. Guest bathroom. His bedroom, which he pointed to but didn't enter. Then he opened a door at the end of the hallway. "This is your room." Natalie stepped inside and felt her breath catch. The space was larger than the entire apartment she had shared with her mother. A king-sized bed dominated one wall, dressed in soft white linens. A sitting area with a comfortable chair and reading lamp occupied the corner. French doors opened onto a private balcony overlooking the harbor. I had my assistant stock the closet with some basics, Julian said, gesturing to a walk-in closet that was bigger than her old bedroom. We'll need to go shopping for appropriate formal wear before the foundation gala next week. You'll need to look the part. There it was again. The part. The role she was playing. The beautiful deception they were constructing together. Julian, Natalie said, turning to face him. I need to understand something. When we're alone like this, do we still have to pretend? He considered the question carefully, his hands in his pockets. No. When we're here, you can be yourself. This is your home for the next year. I want you to be comfortable. And when we're out there? She gestured toward the windows, toward the city beyond. Out there, we're a couple who met through the hospital, fell quickly in love, and decided life was too short to wait. We'll need to know details about each other, things a wife would know about her husband. We should probably spend some time going over our stories. It sounded so calculated, so cold. But Natalie had signed the contract. She had taken his money. Her mother was alive because of this arrangement. She didn't have the luxury of being romantic about any of it. Okay, she agreed. When do we start? Over the next week, Natalie discovered that pretending to be in love required more work than she had ever imagined. Julian approached it like a research project, creating folders of information they both needed to memorize. They sat in his living room each evening after he returned from the hospital, reviewing details over coffee. Where they supposedly had their first date. A small Italian restaurant in the North End. His favorite food. Anything his housekeeper prepared, but especially her roasted chicken. Her favorite flower. He had guessed correctly, peonies, which now appeared in a vase in her room every Monday. How did you know? Natalie asked when she first saw them. I asked your mother, Julian admitted. She was happy to tell me. I think she likes the idea of us together. That hit harder than Natalie expected. Her mother didn't know the truth. Catherine thought her daughter had found genuine love with a brilliant, handsome doctor. The deception felt heavier knowing it included the one person Natalie never wanted to lie to. They practiced walking together, Julian's hand resting lightly on the small of her back. They practiced sitting close, their bodies angled toward each other in the way couples naturally did. They practiced small touches, his fingers brushing her arm, her hand on his shoulder. Each touch felt like electricity. Each moment of practiced intimacy reminded Natalie that none of it was real. One evening, Julian's colleague Dr. Rebecca Mills stopped by unexpectedly. Natalie had met her briefly at the hospital, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who clearly cared deeply about Julian. So you're the one who finally got him to settle down, Rebecca said, studying Natalie with open curiosity. I've known Julian for 15 years and never thought I'd see the day. They were sitting in the living room, and Julian had his arm draped casually across the back of the sofa behind Natalie. It was for show, she knew, but it felt warm and solid and strangely comforting. I surprised myself too, Natalie said with a smile she hoped looked genuine. How did he propose? Rebecca asked. Please tell me it was romantic. This man has no sense of romance whatsoever. Julian's fingers tensed slightly against her shoulder. They hadn't prepared a story for this. Natalie felt panic rising in her chest, but she forced herself to speak naturally. It was actually very simple, she said, improvising. We were walking along the harbor at sunset. He just stopped, took my hands, and told me he didn't want to spend another day of his life without me in it. Rebecca's eyes softened. That sounds exactly like Julian. Straightforward and honest. After Rebecca left, Julian turned to Natalie with something like respect in his eyes. That was good. Quick thinking. We should probably come up with more stories, Natalie suggested. People are going to ask questions. Agreed. He pulled out his phone to make notes. We'll work on it this weekend. But the weekend brought something neither of them had planned for. When pretend feels real. Saturday morning, Julian knocked on her bedroom door earlier than usual. "I have to check on a patient at the hospital. Would you like to come with me? We could get breakfast afterward." It wasn't part of their agreement. They didn't need to spend extra time together when no one was watching. But Natalie found herself saying yes anyway. The hospital on a Saturday morning had a different energy than the frantic pace of weekday emergencies. Julian moved through the halls with easy confidence, greeting nurses by name, stopping to check charts, his whole demeanor shifting into the focused intensity she had first witnessed through the ICU observation window. She waited in the hallway while he examined his patient, an elderly man recovering from bypass surgery. Through the open door, she could hear their conversation. Julian's voice was gentler than she had ever heard it, patient and encouraging as he explained each aspect of the recovery process. "You're going to be fine, Mr. Chen," he said. "Your heart is strong. You just need to give it time to heal." When he emerged, Natalie saw something in his expression she hadn't noticed before. Genuine satisfaction. Joy, even. This was why he did what he did. Not for the money or the prestige, but for moments like this. For the privilege of telling someone their heart was strong. They had breakfast at a small diner near the hospital, sitting in a booth with cracked vinyl seats and laminated menus. Julian ordered coffee and scrambled eggs. Natalie got pancakes and hot chocolate. "You don't have to come with me to these things," Julian said, pouring sugar into his coffee. "The hospital visits. When we're not being observed." "I wanted to," Natalie replied honestly. "It's interesting, watching you work. You become a different person." "Different how?" "Warmer. More open. Like you forget to be guarded." Julian stirred his coffee slowly, considering her words. "Medicine is simple. Bodies follow predictable patterns. You diagnose the problem and fix it. People are more complicated. Is that why you prefer patients to relationships?" He looked up at her, and for a moment, the mask slipped completely. "I prefer things I can control. Relationships are chaos. They break without warning and there's no surgery that can fix them." Natalie understood then. Someone had hurt him badly enough that he had built walls around his heart higher than the tower where they now lived. The no falling in love rule wasn't just for her protection. It was for his. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, and something shifted between them. Not attraction exactly, though Natalie was increasingly aware of the way light caught in his dark hair, the strength in his hands, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. It was something deeper than physical attraction. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. Two people who had both learned to protect themselves by keeping everyone else at a careful distance. The Foundation Gala. The Ashford Medical Foundation Gala was held at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Natalie spent hours getting ready, her hands shaking as she applied makeup and styled her hair. The dress Julian's stylist had chosen was stunning, a deep emerald silk that flowed like water and made her dark hair and eyes stand out dramatically. When she emerged from her room, Julian was waiting in the living room, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. He looked up as she entered, and for just a second, his careful composure cracked. Something flashed in his eyes, surprise or appreciation or something more complicated that he quickly locked away. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Natalie managed, though her heart was racing. The museum glittered with hundreds of guests, all dressed in formal wear that probably cost more than Natalie used to make in a year. Julian kept his hand on her waist as they moved through the crowd, introducing her to board members and donors and colleagues. "This is my wife, Natalie," he said over and over, and each time the word wife sent a small shock through her system. Victor Ashford appeared halfway through the evening. He was shorter than Julian but carried himself with aggressive confidence, his pale eyes sharp and calculating. When Julian introduced them, Victor's handshake was just a touch too firm, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. How fortunate that Julian found love so quickly, Victor said, his tone suggesting he found it anything but fortunate. Such a whirlwind romance. You must tell me the whole story. Natalie felt Julian tense beside her, but she smiled warmly. Sometimes you just know. When you meet the right person, why wait? Indeed. Victor's gaze moved between them, searching for cracks in their performance. I look forward to getting to know you better, Natalie. Family is so important, don't you think? After he walked away, Julian leaned close to whisper in her ear. He suspects something. We need to be more convincing. More convincing how? Instead of answering, Julian took her hand and led her to the dance floor. A string quartet played something slow and romantic. He pulled her close, one hand on her waist, the other holding hers. They moved together in perfect synchronization, as if they had been dancing together for years instead of days. Everyone is watching us, Julian murmured, his breath warm against her hair. We need to sell this. Natalie looked up at him, at the serious set of his jaw, the intensity in his gray-blue eyes. Then we better make it good. She moved closer, resting her head against his shoulder. She felt his surprise in the way his hand tightened slightly on her waist. To anyone watching, they looked like a couple completely absorbed in each other. In love. Content in each other's arms. The dangerous part was how easy it felt. How natural it seemed to be held by him. How her body fit against his like they had been designed to move together. Natalie reminded herself firmly that this was an act. A performance. Nothing more. But when the song ended and Julian looked down at her, there was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. Something that made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, the line between pretending and reality was starting to blur for him too. We should go, he said abruptly, stepping back. It's late. Crossing lines. The ride home was quiet. Julian stared out the window of the car, his jaw tight, hands clasped in his lap. Natalie wanted to ask what he was thinking but didn't dare. She had felt it on the dance floor, that dangerous current of something real passing between them. Speaking about it would make it impossible to deny. When they reached the penthouse, Julian went straight to his office without saying goodnight. Natalie changed out of her gown and into comfortable clothes, but she couldn't sleep. The evening kept replaying in her mind, the feel of his hand on her waist, the warmth of his body against hers, the way he had looked at her like she was the only person in the room. She found herself walking to his office door. Light spilled out from underneath. She knocked softly. Come in. Julian sat behind his desk, still in his tuxedo pants and white shirt, tie discarded, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed papers. He looked tired and human and nothing like the cold surgeon who had proposed this arrangement. I couldn't sleep, Natalie admitted. Neither could I. He set down his papers. You did well tonight. Very convincing. So did you. They looked at each other across the office, and the air felt thick with things neither of them could say. All the rules they had agreed to. All the boundaries they had promised not to cross. Natalie, Julian said quietly. We need to be careful. I know. Victor is looking for any excuse to challenge the marriage. If he finds evidence that this isn't real, I lose everything. I understand. But what Natalie understood, what terrified her more than Victor's suspicions or broken contracts, was that somewhere between the practiced touches and the rehearsed smiles, something genuine had started growing. Something that felt like the beginning of feelings she had promised never to have. Julian stood and walked to the window, his back to her. When this year is over, you'll take your money and start fresh somewhere. Build the life you've always wanted. And what about you? Natalie asked. What life will you have? The same one I've always had. The foundation. The hospital. My work. That sounds lonely. Lonely is safe. He turned to face her, and in the dim light of his office, he looked more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. Lonely doesn't break your heart. Natalie crossed the room before she could stop herself. She stood in front of him, close enough to see the shadows under his eyes, the slight stubble on his jaw, all the small human details that his polished exterior usually hid. Who hurt you so badly that you decided never to feel anything again? Julian's expression closed off immediately. That's not part of our agreement. Neither is this conversation, Natalie pointed out. But here we are, at 2 a.m, talking about things that matter. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said, her name was Sophia. We were engaged 8 years ago. She left 2 weeks before the wedding when she met someone wealthier. She told me I was too focused on my work, too cold, impossible to love. The pain in his voice was old but still sharp, like a scar that never quite healed properly. Natalie's heart ached for him, for the young man who had been abandoned and had decided the solution was to never trust anyone again. She was wrong, Natalie said firmly. You're not impossible to love. Julian's eyes darkened. Don't what? Don't start caring about me, Natalie. That's not what this is. But they both knew it was already too late for warnings. The careful distance they had maintained was crumbling, and neither of them knew how to stop it. Julian reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. It was the first time he had touched her when no one was watching. The first time it wasn't part of the act. We should both get some sleep, he said, but he didn't move away. Julian, Natalie whispered. He closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. Good night, Natalie. This time when he said it, it sounded like a goodbye. Like he was trying to rebuild the walls that had started to crumble between them. Natalie nodded and left his office, but she could feel his gaze following her down the hallway. Back in her room, she lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling. 1 month down. 11 more to go. An entire year of pretending not to feel what she was already feeling. An entire year of watching Julian pretend he felt nothing when she had seen the truth in his eyes tonight. The rule had been clear. No falling in love. But somewhere between the contract signing and the foundation gala, between the practice touches and genuine conversations, Natalie had started breaking the most important rule of all. And she suspected she wasn't breaking it alone. 3 months into their arrangement, Natalie had learned to navigate the strange double life she now led. By day, she played the role of Julian Ashford's devoted wife, attending charity luncheons and foundation meetings, smiling for cameras and making small talk with Boston's elite. By night, she returned to the penthouse where they lived as polite strangers, careful not to cross the invisible lines they had drawn between them. Except the lines kept shifting. It started with small things. Julian began leaving fresh coffee for her each morning before he left for the hospital, exactly the way she liked it, with cream and 1 sugar. She started keeping his favorite dark chocolate in the kitchen, the expensive Swiss kind he thought he hid in his office drawer. They developed routines without discussing them, comfortable patterns that felt dangerously domestic. Her mother had moved into a rehabilitation facility near the harbor, growing stronger each day. Catherine glowed with happiness whenever Natalie visited, asking about Julian with obvious affection. The guilt of lying to her mother grew heavier with each passing week. "He's so good to you," Catherine said one afternoon as they sat in the facility's garden. Cherry blossoms drifted down around them like pink snow. "I can see how much he cares. The way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching." Natalie's heart twisted. "Mom, it's complicated." "Love always is, sweetheart." Catherine patted her hand gently. "But complicated doesn't mean wrong. That man loves you. I'd bet my life on it." If only she knew how literally life and love had been weighed against each other in this arrangement. That evening, Natalie returned to the penthouse to find Julian in the kitchen, attempting to cook dinner. Smoke billowed from a pan on the stove, and he waved a dish towel frantically at the smoke detector. Don't say anything, he warned as she burst out laughing. I wasn't going to say a word. She moved to the stove and turned off the burner, examining the charred remains of what might have once been chicken. Although I'm curious what this was supposed to be. Dinner. Julian looked genuinely frustrated. I watched 3 cooking videos. It looked simple. Why are you cooking? Where's Mrs. Patterson? Their housekeeper usually left prepared meals in the refrigerator. I gave her the week off. Her daughter just had a baby. He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it adorably disheveled. I thought I could manage basic cooking. Apparently, I overestimated my abilities. Natalie opened the refrigerator and pulled out vegetables and pasta. Come on. I'll teach you something simple. You save lives for a living. I'm pretty sure you can handle spaghetti. They worked side by side in the kitchen, Natalie guiding him through each step. Julian followed her instructions with the same focused intensity he probably brought to surgery, measuring ingredients precisely and asking questions about technique. When his hand accidentally brushed hers while reaching for the olive oil, they both froze for just a moment before continuing as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something had been happening for weeks now, building like pressure behind a dam. They ate dinner at the small table by the window, watching the harbor lights reflect on the dark water. The conversation flowed easily, moving from medicine to art to books they had both loved as children. Julian told her about growing up in the shadow of the Ashford name, the pressure to be perfect, to never show weakness. Natalie shared stories about her father, who had died when she was 12, leaving her mother to raise her alone. He used to say that love was the only thing worth being brave for, Natalie said softly. Everything else, you could do afraid. But love required courage. Julian's expression turned serious. Your father was a wise man. He was. I wish you could have met him. I think he would have liked you. Even knowing our arrangement isn't real? The question hung in the air between them. Natalie set down her fork, meeting his eyes directly. Is it still not real, Julian? These dinners, these conversations, the way we've started to actually know each other. Is all of this still pretend? Julian looked away first. It has to be. Why? Because in 9 months, you leave. You take your money and start the life you deserve, away from all of this. That was the deal. And if I don't want to leave? The words escaped before Natalie could stop them. Julian's head snapped up, his eyes wide with something that looked like panic mixed with hope mixed with fear. Don't, he said hoarsely. Don't say things like that. Why not? We're alone. No one is performing for anyone right now. Exactly. Which means we need to be honest. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. This can't become real, Natalie. I can't let it. Can't or won't. Both. He turned to face her, and she saw the walls slamming back into place, the vulnerability disappearing behind cold control. I made that mistake once. I let myself believe in something that wasn't real. I won't do it again. I'm not Sophia, Natalie said firmly, standing to face him. I'm not leaving you for someone with a bigger bank account. That's not who I am. You don't understand. Julian's voice rose slightly, frustration bleeding through. It's not about the money. It's about the fact that I'm not capable of being what you need. Sophia was right about that. I'm too focused on my work. Too distant. Too broken to be what anyone deserves. That's not true. Isn't it? He laughed bitterly. I proposed a fake marriage to a stranger instead of risking a real relationship. I built my entire adult life around avoiding emotional connection. What part of that sounds like someone capable of love? Natalie crossed the distance between them, standing so close she could see the pulse beating in his throat. The part where you saved my mother's life. The part where you leave coffee for me every morning. The part where you tried to cook me dinner even though you're terrible at it. The part where you look at me like I matter, even when you're trying so hard to pretend I don't. Natalie, he breathed, her name almost a warning. I'm breaking the rule, Julian. I'm falling in love with you. I probably have been since the night you asked me to dance at the gala. Maybe even before that. The confession hung between them like a lit match hovering over gasoline. Julian's careful control shattered. He closed the remaining distance and kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was desperate and real and full of all the feelings they had both been trying so hard to deny. His hands cupped her face like she was something precious and fragile. She gripped his shirt, pulling him closer, 3 months of suppressed desire finally breaking free. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Julian rested his forehead against hers. This is a terrible idea. I know, Natalie whispered. We have a contract. Rules. Boundaries. I know. If this goes wrong, if I hurt you the way I hurt everyone who gets close to me, I'll never forgive myself. Then don't hurt me. She pulled back to look him in the eyes. Take a risk, Julian. Be brave. He kissed her again, softer this time, and she felt the exact moment he stopped fighting. The moment he decided that maybe, just maybe, some rules were worth breaking. The cousin's discovery. Victor Ashford had been watching. Waiting. Searching for any crack in the perfect facade his cousin had constructed. And now, 3 months in, he finally found what he was looking for. The photographs arrived at Julian's office on a Thursday morning, delivered in an unmarked envelope. Julian had just finished a complicated surgery and was reviewing post-operative notes when his assistant brought in the package with a worried expression. Inside were a dozen photos. Julian and Natalie on the day they signed the contract, Natalie's face streaked with tears and panic. A copy of the hospital bill with a handwritten note about payment arrangements. Bank records showing the large deposit into Natalie's account immediately after the wedding. Even a screenshot of the consultation room security footage from that first night. The final item was a handwritten note in Victor's distinctive scrawl, family meeting tomorrow. 10 a.m. Come prepared to explain. Julian's blood ran cold. He grabbed his phone and called Natalie immediately. We have a problem. She arrived at his office within the hour, her face pale as he showed her the evidence Victor had compiled. The photographs laid out on his desk looked damning, the truth of their arrangement exposed in black and white. How did he get all this? Natalie asked, her hands shaking. Victor has connections everywhere. Hospital staff, bank employees, private investigators. I should have known he'd dig deeper. Julian's jaw was tight with barely controlled anger. The foundation board meeting is tomorrow. He's going to present this evidence and argue that our marriage is fraudulent. If they rule in his favor, I lose control of the foundation. What happens to us? The marriage contract becomes void. You'd still receive your payment, that's legally binding. But everything else. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Everything else. The life they had started building together. The feelings they had finally admitted. All of it would be destroyed by the very agreement that had brought them together. Natalie stood and walked to the window, her arms wrapped around herself. Outside, Boston spread out in the late afternoon light, beautiful and indifferent to the drama unfolding 42 floors below. There's one way to make this real, she said quietly. What do you mean? She turned to face him. What if we tell the truth? Not about the contract, about us. About what's happened since then. We started as a business arrangement, but somewhere along the way, it became real. That's not fraud. That's just life. Julian wanted to believe her. He wanted to walk into that boardroom tomorrow and declare that yes, their marriage had begun as a contract, but it had transformed into something genuine. Something worth fighting for. But years of protecting himself, of building walls and maintaining control, made the words stick in his throat. "What if they don't believe us?" he asked. "What if they do? The truth and nothing but." The foundation boardroom was paneled in dark wood and leather, designed to intimidate. 15 board members sat around the massive table, with Victor at the far end, looking like a prosecutor who already knew the verdict. Julian and Natalie entered hand in hand, presenting a united front even as Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. Rebecca Mills was there, her expression worried but supportive. Several other doctors Julian had worked with for years looked uncomfortable, clearly not wanting to be part of whatever confrontation Victor had orchestrated. "Thank you all for coming," Victor began smoothly. "I've called this emergency meeting because evidence has come to light regarding Julian's marriage. Evidence that suggests this union may not be what it appears." He distributed copies of the photographs and documents. Natalie felt Julian's hand tighten on hers as the board members reviewed the materials, their expressions ranging from confused to concerned. "As you can see," Victor continued, "Julian's wife was a complete stranger to him until the night her mother was admitted to the hospital. Mere weeks before his 35th birthday, which, as we all know, is the deadline for marriage according to our founder's will. The timing is remarkably convenient." "What exactly are you suggesting, Victor?" Rebecca asked sharply. "I'm suggesting this is a marriage of convenience. A business transaction designed solely to maintain control of the foundation. Which violates the spirit of grandfather's wishes, if not the letter of the law." All eyes turned to Julian. This was the moment where he should present the carefully prepared explanation he and his lawyer had drafted. The story about love at first sight, about knowing immediately that Natalie was the one. The performance they had practiced so many times before. But when Julian opened his mouth, what came out was the truth. "Victor is right." Gasps echoed around the room. Natalie squeezed his hand, offering silent support. Julian continued, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Natalie and I did meet the night her mother was admitted to the hospital. I did propose a marriage contract to her, a business arrangement that would benefit us both. Everything Victor has presented is factually accurate." Victor smiled triumphantly. "Then by the foundation bylaws, I move that Julian Ashford be removed as director and—" "I'm not finished," Julian interrupted. He stood, still holding Natalie's hand, pulling her up beside him. "Yes, our marriage began as a contract. But that's not how it ended." He turned to look at Natalie, and everyone in the room could see the emotion on his face. Real, undeniable, vulnerable. "I spent 8 years after my engagement ended believing I was incapable of love. That I was too damaged, too focused on my work, too fundamentally broken to connect with anyone. I built walls so high that no one could get through. And then I met Natalie." His voice softened. "She didn't try to break down my walls. She just quietly existed on the other side of them, being herself. Kind and strong and genuine. She made me coffee without being asked. She laughed at my terrible jokes. She looked at me like I was human instead of the Ashford name or the famous surgeon. She saw me." Natalie's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "Somewhere between the contract and now, I fell in love with my wife," Julian continued. "I didn't plan it. I actively fought against it. But love doesn't care about contracts or walls or carefully maintained control. It just is." He turned back to the board. "So yes, Victor, our marriage began as a business arrangement. But it became real. It became the most real thing in my life. And if you want to remove me from the foundation because I was desperate enough to find a loophole in my grandfather's archaic rule, then do it. But don't for 1 second suggest that what Natalie and I have isn't genuine." The room fell silent. Victor's smile had disappeared, replaced by frustration. Rebecca was openly crying. The other board members looked at each other, clearly moved by Julian's confession. "I have a question for Mrs. Ashford," said Margaret Chen, the foundation's oldest board member. Is what your husband says true? Do you love him? Every eye in the room turned to Natalie. This was the moment. She could confirm the lie, play her part one last time. Or she could risk everything on the truth. I love him, Natalie said clearly. I fought against it because we had a rule. No falling in love. But Julian is stubborn and brilliant and completely impossible not to love. He saved my mother's life, not because of any contract, but because that's who he is. He saves people. And somehow, without meaning to, he saved me too. She looked at Julian, and the love on her face was so obvious that even Victor couldn't deny it. When we started this, Natalie continued, I thought I was giving up a year of my life for money. But what I actually found was a home. A partner. Someone who sees me as clearly as I see him. That's not fraud. That's just two broken people learning how to be whole together. Margaret Chen smiled, her eyes crinkling with warmth. I think I've heard enough. All in favor of dismissing these charges and confirming Dr. Julian Ashford as director of the foundation? 14 hands went up. Only Victor's remained down. Motion carries, Margaret announced. This meeting is adjourned. And Julian? Your grandfather would be proud. Not because you followed his rule, but because you found what he actually wanted for you. Love. 1 year later. The real wedding was nothing like the quick courthouse ceremony they had gone through to satisfy the contract. This one was small but perfect, held in the botanical gardens with cherry blossoms drifting down like blessings. Catherine walked Natalie down the aisle, her heart strong and her smile radiant. Rebecca served as Julian's best woman, still teasing him about finally admitting he had feelings. A handful of close friends and colleagues filled the chairs, people who knew the whole complicated story and had cheered for them anyway. Julian stood at the altar in a dark suit, his eyes never leaving Natalie as she approached. She wore a simple white dress, her dark hair crowned with fresh flowers, looking like everything he had never known he needed. The officiant asked if anyone objected to the union. Victor, who had been grudgingly invited for family peace, remained silent. He had sold his foundation shares to a medical research company and moved to California, finally accepting that some battles were not worth fighting. When it came time for vows, Julian took both of Natalie's hands in his. A year ago, I asked you to marry me with a list of rules and conditions. I thought I could control everything, including my own heart. I was wrong about so many things, but especially about you. His voice caught slightly. You taught me that being broken doesn't mean being incapable of love. It just means finding someone patient enough to help you heal. I love you, Natalie. Not because of a contract, but because you're you. And I promise to spend the rest of my life being brave enough to deserve you. Natalie smiled through her tears. You once told me that I wasn't allowed to fall in love with you. That was the one rule I couldn't follow. But I'm glad I broke it, because loving you has been the best decision I ever made. You gave me my mother's life back, but more than that, you gave me my own life. A real one, full of possibility and hope and the kind of love I thought only existed in stories. I promise to keep breaking all your rules, especially the ones you make up to protect yourself. Because you don't need protection from me, Julian. You just need love. They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that meant everything and nothing all at once. Just symbols of a commitment that had already been tested and proven true. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the officiant said with a smile. Again. But this time, it counts. Julian kissed her, and the small gathering applauded. Natalie laughed against his lips, joy bubbling up irrepressibly. When they finally broke apart, Julian rested his forehead against hers. No more contracts, he murmured. No more rules, she agreed. Just us. Just us. Epilogue, 2 years after. The penthouse had changed. Natalie's artwork hung on the walls now, bright splashes of color against Julian's minimalist decor. Her design studio occupied what used to be a spare bedroom, filled with sketches and fabric samples for the children's book series she was illustrating. Catherine visited twice a week, healthy and vibrant, bringing homemade soup and stories about the community center where she now volunteered. She had forgiven them instantly when they finally confessed the truth about how their marriage began, saying she had suspected all along but figured they needed to work it out themselves. Julian still worked long hours at the hospital, but he came home now. Really came home, instead of hiding in his office. They cooked dinner together more often than not, with Julian's skills having improved dramatically under Natalie's patient teaching. On their second anniversary, they stood on the balcony watching the sunset paint the harbor in shades of gold and pink. Natalie leaned back against Julian's chest, his arms wrapped around her waist, both of them content in the comfortable silence they had learned to share. "Do you ever regret it?" Julian asked quietly. "That night in the hospital. If you could go back, would you make the same choice?" Natalie turned in his arms to face him. "Are you seriously asking if I regret falling in love with you?" "I'm asking if you regret how we started." She thought about it seriously, because Julian deserved that. She thought about the fear and desperation of that night, the impossible choice she had faced, the contract that had bound them together before they even knew each other. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. Because yes, we started with a contract and rules and walls between us. But we also started with honesty, in a strange way. You told me exactly what you were offering and why. You never pretended to be something you weren't. And that honesty, even when it was brutal, was the foundation everything else was built on." She reached up to touch his face, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "Besides, if we had met any other way, you probably would have been too scared to talk to me. You needed that contract to feel safe enough to let me in." Julian smiled, that rare full smile that still made her heart skip. "You know me too well. That's what happens when you break all the rules and actually fall in love with someone." He kissed her, slow and deep, the way he always did when words failed him. When they finally broke apart, the sun had set completely, leaving only the glittering lights of the city and the stars emerging overhead. "I have something for you," Julian said, pulling a small box from his pocket. "It's not our anniversary for another week," Natalie protested. "I know. But I saw this and thought of you." He opened the box to reveal a delicate necklace, a small heart-shaped pendant with a tiny lock on it. "Because you found the key to a heart I thought was locked forever." Natalie's eyes filled with tears as he fastened it around her neck. "You're getting sentimental in your old age, Dr. Ashford. Only with you, Mrs. Ashford. Only ever with you." They stood together on the balcony as the city lights sparkled below and the future stretched out before them, unlimited and unscripted. No more contracts. No more rules. Just two people who had learned that sometimes the best love stories begin with the most impossible agreements. And somewhere in the penthouse, filed away in Julian's office, was a contract with a single line crossed out and rewritten in Natalie's handwriting. "You are not allowed to fall in love with me. Too late. Already did. No regrets." Julian had signed his initials next to it with a smile, finally understanding that some rules were made to be broken. And some contracts were meant to be rewritten with love. The end.